Knighthood was not a calling, it was a conditioning. They told us of valiant horsemen, warriors whose blades sang for justice. Men who rode into battle for virtue, but those stories were crafted not to illuminate history, but to soothe conscience. Reality bore no resemblance to legend. Reality was darker, colder, and profoundly human. Knighthood did not begin with steel, it began with submission. Young boys were not recruited for their courage, but for their lineage. Sons of noble blood, abducted from tenderness and thrust into the crucible of obedience. Their minds were not nurtured, they were shaped, bent, broken. Every hour of training, every scar of discipline, every silent night spent alone wasn't preparation for heroism, okay? It was preparation for compliance, okay? They were taught to forget who they were. Names faded, smiles vanished, individuality dissolved. They became part of a machine gears turning, not toward justice, but power. The knight was not a beacon, he was a blade. What the stories do not tell is that mercy was punished, that compassion was weakness, that loyalty was demanded not by virtue, but by fear. The knight's code was not a code of morality, was a blueprint for control. It praised suffering. It celebrated silence. It rewarded cruelty if carried out in the name of hierarchy. By the time they wore armor, they no longer questioned the hand that gave it. By the time they held swords, they no longer remembered why it was wrong to swing them. Knighthood was not earned through honor, was enforced through erasure. The erasure of childhood. The erasure of empathy. The erasure of self. They did not defend the weak because they were noble. They killed the weak because they were told it was noble. And thus, the knight emerged not as a man but as a construct, sculpted by fear, sharpened by ritual, silenced by duty. This is not the story of gallant warriors. This is the story of how brutality wore a mask and called it honor. Knighthood was never a choice, it was a consequence of birth. When a boy was born into nobility, his future was already decided. He would not become a knight because he desired greatness, but because tradition demanded it. Thrived on inheritance. Nobility meant obligation. Prestige came with a price. The child became a vessel of legacy, not a person. Recruitment was the first step in erasing personal ambition. To be chosen for knighthood was often portrayed as a gift. In truth, it was a sentence, one handed down by lineage, not earned through character. Parents rarely asked if their sons wanted this life. They asked if the family name could survive. Without it, some fathers saw it as a necessary pride. Some mothers wept silently as their children were taken. In the recruiting chambers, boys stood in line while their names were recorded damned, their identities erased. They were no longer sons. They were now property of the code. The recruitment halls echoed with sermons about duty and sacrifice. But behind closed doors, deals were struck not for justice, but for favor. Influence mattered, land ownership mattered, reputation mattered. The knight was not forged in fire, he was forged in politics. Behind every sword laid a ledger. Behind every noble signature, a power play. And once selected, the boy's life changed irrevocably. Childhood pleasures were discarded. Affection was replaced with discipline. His name ceased to be spoken. Only titles remained. Recruitment didn't ask, "Are you ready?" It asked, "Do you belong?" To us, this was not the beginning of a hero's tale. It was the beginning of quiet captivity, wrapped in armor, silenced by duty. Before a knight could hold a sword, he had to lose everything: his softness, his selfhood, and most of all his silence. Training wasn't a path to greatness. It was a ritual of destruction. Training was brutal, not heroic. The body was punished into strength. The mind was conditioned into obedience. The soul was ignored, flattened, reshaped to fit a uniform mold. From the crack of dawn to the last fading embers of night, their lives were schedules of sweat, pain, and precision. No joy. No laughter. No questioning. There was no room for identity in the training halls. Individuality was seen as resistance. Thoughtfulness was seen as weakness. Friendship was discouraged unless it reinforced the code. Every lesson had only one goal: replace instinct with response, emotion with repetition, humanity with hardness. Failure was a weapon wielded against them. Mistakes weren't corrected. They were punished. Mercy shown in sparring led to isolation. Hesitation during drills earned public humiliation. To survive training meant not to learn skills, but to learn how to disappear into the system. Weapons were not just tools, they were lessons. The sword taught speed, Akeda. The mace taught cruelty. The lance taught dominance. Armor was worn not to protect but to restrict, to test breath, balance. Will, even silence, became a skill one mastered through shame and comparison. They didn't graduate into knighthood. They were forged into it, bent like iron, hardened by cold mornings and bleeding knuckles. By the end of it, they were no longer children. They were no longer themselves. They were knights. Justice was a story. Obedience was reality. Knighthood wasn't earned for compassion, it was demanded for control. A knight served not the people, but the will of those who claimed to speak for them. Their swords did not protect the weak, they enforced silence. Castles weren't built to shelter, but to dominate. Orders weren't questioned, they were delivered like iron laws. The knight became a symbol not of virtue, but of allegiance. They rode not toward danger for the helpless. They rode to crush dissent, to burn rebellion before it spoke. Every mission was framed as honor. Slaughtering peasants was called quelling uprisings. Enforcing brutal laws was restoring peace. Blind loyalty was celebrated as knightly virtue. They had been taught to follow, not to understand, not to resist, and most of all, not to feel. Those who hesitated were threats. A knight who questioned was labeled a traitor. A knight who refused was erased. A knight who wept was simply never remembered. In service, they weren't heroes. They were instruments. and every oath they swore was one more nail in their conscience's coffin. He was never alone, but he was never with anyone. They were always surrounded by orders, by squires, by kings, by enemies, but never by themselves. Armor didn't just cover the body, it buried the soul. The weight of steel became normal. The echo inside the helmet replaced. Real voices, even warmth was filtered through leather and iron. To be a knight was to become unreachable, touched only by duty, seen only through protocol. Friendship faded. Bonds were formed through obligation. Brotherhood meant shared silence, not shared truth. Affection was weakness dressed as camaraderie. Their titles made them visible, but their emotions made them disappear. Loneliness didn't come from isolation, it came from performance. Every action watched. Every mistake recorded. Every hesitation turned into legend or shame. In time, they stopped seeking connection because the armor never came off. Not in battle, not in rest, not even in sleep. They weren't afraid of death. They were afraid of no one noticing they had lived. Their cage had a name, Knighthood. They were promised honor. What they found was obedience. And what they lost was themselves. Knighthood was supposed to be meaning, glory, brotherhood, justice. But what they lived was control, isolation, silence. Futh had a price no one disclosed. It cost self-respect. It cost self-respect. It cost the ability to choose. They remembered. The child who dreamed of shining armor, not knowing that it would never gleam again, not after blood and guilt had stained it. Their heroes became ghosts. Legends were illusions told by old men. Statues were carved from myth, not truth. Every tale hid the screams behind victories. They began to ask, what was it all for? And the silence answered louder than words. Doubt was their only rebellion. They stared into mirrors and saw the eyes of strangers. They fought for codes they no longer believed in. They served causes they'd never chosen. And worst of all, they realized too late that knighthood had not just reshaped them. They weren't remembered. They were repeated. Knights were praised in songs and carved into stone, but never remembered for who they truly were. History didn't honor them. It recycled them. Every name blurred into legend. Every wound polished into glory. Every scream erased. The people they served forgot their faces. The kings they protected forgot their names. The world remembered the title, never the man. Statues stood cold and hollow. They captured victory, not pain. They displayed posture, not burden. They inspired pride, not empathy. Each night became a metaphor, each death a decoration. Their legacy wasn't passed down, it was consumed, new. Boys dreamt the same illusion. The machine welcomed fresh flesh. The silence began again. Knighthood lived on, but the knights, they were ghosts. Doomed to inspire, never to be understood. What did you think about the brutal training of medieval knights? Were they heroes? or just weapons in armor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and if you enjoy diving deep into the dark and fascinating corners of history, hit that subscribe button and join the journey. There's much more to uncover. See you in the next episode.